Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning I'll be talking about another discourse from the Buddha. This is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, sutta number 64. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the sutta and give some explanations. Then if there's any questions, I'll respond to that at the end. So please feel free to type in questions at any time. So we'll start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, this is in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, sutta number 64, which is titled here Kodhana Sutta. So the word Kodhana, it's translated here as irritable, but it also has the meaning of anger and resentment. So Kodhana means to be angry, irritable, grumpy, resentful. It has that constellation of meanings. So the Buddha begins, he says, monks, these 7 things that please and assist an enemy happen to an irritable woman or man. So again, irritable here means also angry or resentful. So to a person who is angry, irritable, or resentful, then these 7 things please and assist their enemies. So the first one, the Buddha says, firstly, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only they would become ugly. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have a beautiful enemy. So this is the first situation. So when you're angry with somebody else, when you have resentment towards somebody else, then you might form a hostile wish, a hostile attitude of like, oh, I wish they would become ugly. And however, the Buddha says, he says, an angry person, an angry, irritable, resentful person, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, is ugly, even when they're nicely bathed and anointed, with hair and beard dressed, and wearing white clothes. So here the Buddha is pointing out that even though one might wish for your enemy to be unattractive, the truth is that when your own mind is overcome with anger, irritation, resentment, grumpiness, hostility, then that makes you look ugly. That makes you unattractive. So even if you're, as he says here, even if you're nicely bathed, you've done your hair well, you're wearing clean clothing, so even if your physical appearance is well made up, when the mind is full of hostile mind states, then that makes your appearance unattractive to other people. So it gives you an ugly facial expression. It creates an atmosphere of discomfort around you, which other people will notice and feel. So again, this is something that we can personally relate to. Like when you see someone who's angry or grumpy or resentful, then they have this unpleasant look to them, which we don't want to be involved with. Whereas you meet someone who's very tolerant and easygoing and friendly, then you just naturally you like to be around them. It's more pleasant to be around them. And so then also then you have a positive perception of their appearance. So again, wishing for one's enemy to be ugly, holding on to all that anger and resentment just makes yourself ugly instead. And the second one, the Buddha says, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only they would sleep poorly. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy who sleeps at ease. However, the Buddha says, an irritable person overcome and overwhelmed by anger sleeps poorly, even though they sleep on a couch spread with woolen covers, shag-piled, pure white, or embroidered with flowers, and spread with a fine deer hide, with a canopy above and red pillows at both ends. So here the Buddha is pointing to the fact that when our mind is full of anger and resentment, then it's hard for us to sleep. So I'm sure we've all had that experience of where you go to bed angry and upset, and then you wind up just rolling over in your mind. Now, whatever it is you're angry about, the person you're angry at, the situation that you're annoyed about, you just keep rolling it around in your mind. And as you're rolling it around in your mind, then it's very difficult to relax and to sleep. So you wind up taking a long time to fall asleep. You're very agitated and disturbed as you're trying to fall asleep. And it might also invade your dreams. So that even once you fall asleep, you may get poor sleep quality. So again, here he's pointing to another one of the dangers of anger and resentment, which is that it makes it harder for us to sleep well at night. So although one might wish for one's enemy to sleep poorly, by holding on to that anger and resentment, we actually just make ourselves sleep poorly. And side note about language. So here the Buddha gives a rather specific description of a comfortable bed. And this is one of those slightly peculiar turns of phrase that we see in many, many suttas. Apparently this was a way of speaking at the time, which basically just meant a luxurious bed. So luxurious beds don't necessarily have red pillows at both ends, as it says here in the suttas. But I think that was just how people would talk at the time of the Buddha. The point is, even if you have a really nice, really luxurious bed with really comfortable mattress and really nice pillows and great blankets and so on, if your mind is full of anger and resentment, then you still will not be comfortable and you still will not sleep well. Then the third thing, the Buddha says, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. May they not get what they need. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy who gets all that they need. When an irritable person overcome and overwhelmed by anger gets what they don't need, they think, I have what I need. When they get what they need, they think, I have what I don't need. When an angry person gets these things that are the exact opposite of what they need, it's for their lasting harm and suffering. So this one is interesting in that it may not be immediately apparent what the Buddha is wishing, what the Buddha is trying to say here. So what he's pointing to is the fact that when one is angry and irritable and resentful, then one's mind tends to be turbulent and unclear. Which makes it more difficult for us to clearly understand the situations that we're in. It makes it more difficult for us to clearly understand what's to our own benefit or our own harm. It makes it more difficult for us to understand what we actually need. So the truth is that most people tend to be pretty delusional and mixed up about needs versus wants. Most people tend to have a rather distorted idea of what they need. So people will say like, oh, I need a drink. It's like, well, no, you don't. No, you don't. It's like, oh, I need a cigarette. It's like, no, you really don't. Or they're like, oh, I need to go out partying tonight. It's like, no, you don't. You don't need that. Or, oh, I need to have this specific food. It's like, no, actually, any food is okay. So we tend to become very distorted about what we need versus what we want. And so when the mind is angry and irritable and resentful, then we get even more mixed up. Our priorities get even more twisted around. So we might then wind up getting things or experiences that we think we want, that we think we need. But it doesn't actually bring us any benefit. It may actually just cause more harm to us. So actually an example would be getting revenge. So you're angry at the person and you think, oh, I need to get back at them. I need to get revenge. I need justice for what's been done. But then maybe you actually do succeed at causing some harm to the other person. But that's not going to make you happy. In fact, it might just make you even more miserable in the short term. So because now you have that added layer of guilt of knowing that you've harmed somebody else. And in the long term, it also is generating bad karma, which will then create bad luck for you in the future. So you might think you're getting what you need, but actually it's the opposite. You're getting something that's harmful to you. Or it might be that you want to get revenge, but it isn't possible. You're not able to do anything to harm the other person. So that's actually good. That's good that you're not harming anyone. But you might be downcast and depressed and irritated, thinking, "Oh, I didn't get my chance to get back at them. This is so awful. I missed my opportunity." But actually, that's not something to be upset about. You should actually be happy that you didn't do anything harmful. So again, our priorities can get quite twisted around when we're motivated by defilements such as anger and resentment. Then the fourth one says, an enemy wishes for an enemy. May they not be wealthy. So of course, wishing the worst for your enemy, or wishing may they be poor. May they not have enough money. May they not have wealth. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy who is wealthy. However, the Buddha says, when a person is irritable, overcome, and overwhelmed by anger, the government seizes the legitimate wealth they've earned by their efforts, built up with their own hands, gathered by the sweat of their brow. So again, here the connection may not be immediately apparent, but what this is getting at is that when one's mind is full of anger, hostility, resentment, then there's a higher chance that you'll be perhaps committing crimes, which will draw uncomfortable attention from government authorities, or you might do things that personally offend people in position of power. And then those people might use their positions of power to confiscate your property or confiscate your wealth. So keeping in mind that in the time of the Buddha, governments were mostly composed of monarchies or oligarchies. So situations where there was near absolute control vested in a small number of people. So if you upset the wrong person, then regardless of whether it's just or unjust, you could very easily wind up losing all of your wealth and influence. So again, when the mind is angry and irritable, then we're more likely to draw negative attention from people in power, which then can make our life extremely uncomfortable. An example the Buddha is giving here is the loss of wealth. If you upset the people in government power, then you might wind up being targeted by the police. You might wind up having your possessions confiscated. Then the fifth one says, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy if only they did not have a good reputation. So it's translated here as if only they weren't famous, but the Pali word yasa doesn't necessarily mean fame. It has more the meaning of like good reputation or glory. Again, not famous in just the ordinary sense of people knowing about you, but rather specifically the sense of having a good reputation. So people have a high opinion of you. People think that you're a respectable person, an honorable person. So having if only they didn't have a good reputation. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy who has a good reputation. However, the Buddha says, when a person is irritable, overcome, and overwhelmed by anger, any good reputation they have acquired by diligence falls to dust. So this also is something important to keep in mind. So even if we've done good things and accumulated a good reputation, if then we start being overwhelmed by anger and resentment, then that good reputation is going to start to crumble. It's going to start to diminish. It's much harder to build up a good reputation than it is to break it. So we can actually see this quite clearly, again, with politicians and other public figures. They might spend 2 or 3 years doing lots of really good things, helping out in lots of ways, but then they make one big mistake. And that's what they're remembered for the rest of their career. They're remembered for that one awful thing they did that one time. So even all those many years of hard work building up a good reputation, if you just say or do the wrong thing at the wrong time, that can all fall apart. So this is the problem. When the mind is angry, irritable, and resentful, then we're going to be more likely to give in to unwholesome impulses, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, which then winds up destroying our reputation. So again, you might be thinking, oh, I really hate that person. I wish they wouldn't have such a good reputation. But then by holding on to that anger and resentment, we wind up damaging our own good reputation. And even if we don't act on that anger and resentment, just being known as like, oh, he's the grumpy one, he's the angry one, he's the resentful one, he's the one who's intolerant, he's the one who never lets go of a grudge. Even that kind of reputation is very poisonous, very harmful. So we really want to be careful not to build up that kind of negative reputation for ourselves. Then the sixth one, the Buddha says, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. I wish they had no friends. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy with friends. But when a person is irritable, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, their friends, colleagues, relatives, and kin avoid them from afar. Again, when we're irritable, angry, prone to resentment and hostility, people don't like to be around us. People usually, they don't like to spend time with somebody who's really unpleasant. They don't want to be around somebody who's prone to lashing out or speaking angrily, or people who hold resentment over the slightest faults. Like that's really not pleasant company. So the more we hold on to our anger and resentment, the more we build up these habits of hostility, then the more we tend to lose friends. And even our family members start to become more distant. And it gets increasingly difficult to surround ourselves with good people, trustworthy and honorable people. And then the last one, the Buddha says, furthermore, an enemy wishes for an enemy. If only when they're separated from their body after death, may they be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, in the underworld, in hell. Why is that? Because an enemy does not like to have an enemy who goes to a good destination. So this is actually quite nasty thinking here. So you're angry at someone and you wish, oh, I wish they would just go to hell. I hope that they're reborn in hell. I hope that when they die, they suffer for eternity in hell. Of course, in Buddhism, hell is not eternal. It's temporary like everything else, but it can last a really long time and it can be really, really uncomfortable. So still, it's pretty bad karma to wish for somebody else to go to hell. And so the Buddha says, why is that? Because an enemy doesn't like to have an enemy who goes to a good destination. So good destination in Pali is sugati. So sugati means like good destiny, good destination. And it is understood to mean the heaven realms. So sugati is usually translated simply as heaven. But it does literally mean a good destiny or good destination. However, the Buddha says, when a person is irritable, overcome and overwhelmed by anger, they do bad things by way of body, speech, and mind. And when they are separated from this body after death, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, in hell. So this is, again, the unpleasant turnabout. So you might be really wishing for your enemy to go to hell. But because we're cultivating so much bad karma, based upon that anger, that resentment, that hostility, we cultivate bad karma with body, speech, and mind. We say bad things, we do bad things, we think bad thoughts. And all of that accumulates bad karma, which then increases the chance that we ourselves will be reborn in hell. that we ourselves will experience the plane of misery and torment. So once again, it's the more we hold on to anger and resentment and hostile wishes towards people that we dislike, the higher the chance that we will experience exactly those same misfortunes ourselves. So instead, we should be wishing the opposite. We should always be wishing the best for others. No matter how much they might have offended us or harmed us in the past, we should always be wishing good fortune for them. We should always be wishing happiness and health for them. We should always be wishing that they have a good rebirth. We should always be wishing that they reach the highest happiness. And then that will also purify our own mind and bring good fortune to us, make our own life better. And then the sutta ends with a series of verses, so a poetry, which basically just summarizes the main teachings of the sutta. So I'll read through the poem here, keeping in mind that this is a translation from Pali, and the poetic quality of it diminishes dramatically in translation. So the poem says, "An irritable person is ugly and they sleep badly. When they get what they need, they take it to be what they don't need. An angry person kills with body or speech. Overcome with anger, they lose their wealth. Mad with anger, they fall into disgrace. Family, friends, and loved ones avoid an irritable person. Anger creates harm. Anger upsets the mind. That person does not recognize the danger that arises within. An angry person does not know the good. An angry person does not see the truth. When a person is beset by anger, only blind darkness is left. An angry person destroys with ease what was hard to build. Afterwards, when the anger is spent, they're tormented as if burnt by fire. Their look betrays their sulkiness like a fire's smoky plume, and when their anger flares up, they make others angry. They have no conscience or prudence, nor any respectful speech. When overcome by anger, has no island of refuge anywhere. The deeds that torment a person are far from those that are good. I'll explain them now. Listen to this, for it is the truth. An angry person kills their father. Their mother too they kill. An angry person kills a saint. A normal person too they kill. A man is raised by his mother, who shows him the world. But an angry ordinary person kills even that good woman who gave him life. Like oneself, all sentient beings hold themselves most dear. But angry people kill themselves all kinds of ways, distraught for many reasons. Some kill themselves with swords, some distraught take poison, some hang themselves with rope or fling themselves down a mountain gorge. When they commit deeds of killing babes and killing themselves, they don't realize what they do, for anger leads to their downfall. The snare of death in the form of anger lies hidden in the heart. You should cut it out by self-control, by wisdom, energy, and right ideas. An astute person should cut out this unskillful thing, and they train in the teaching in just the same way, not yielding to sulkiness. Free of anger, free of despair, free of greed, with no more longing, tamed, having given up anger, the undefiled attain complete awakening." So that's the end of the discourse. So at this time, we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So hello to the people joining in online. So hello to Julie, Nick, Matthias, Edward, Yankee, Richard, Maria, Stevie, Mixie, Sud, Marielle, Manal, Bhumika, Gita, Jim, Stanny, and Jia. Welcome. And let's see if there's any questions here. So Marielle says, basically, whatever we wish for others, we get ourselves. More or less. I mean, that's part of the point the Buddha is making here. Is what he is making here is that the attitudes that we have towards others then wind up shaping our own karma. So similarly, if we have loving attitudes for others, wishing only the best for them, then that generates good karma for ourselves. And we'll tend to have more pleasant experiences in the future as well. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the basic principles of karma. What goes around comes around. What we do for others is what happens to us. And Stanley asks, do you know Dr. Ambedkar? I think he died a long time ago, didn't he? I think he died a long time ago. So I've never met him. I hear he did great things for helping reestablish Buddhism in India, but I never met him. Sud says, why does anger arise despite not wanting it to arise? Because of past habits. So we've trained our mind to have habits of anger, which means it will sometimes appear even though we don't want it to. So it's important to constantly maintain very clear mindfulness of body and mind at all times. And the moment we notice anger starting to arise in the mind, we need to catch it immediately. Stop fueling it, stop feeding it, don't participate in it. Immediately settle the mind, bring the mind back to a state of serenity, of peacefulness. Return to mindfulness of the body. Take a few deep breaths. Gentle the mind, soften the mind. Bring up an attitude of loving kindness. Or think about something else. Think about the Buddha. Bring up an image of the Buddha in your mind. Form the aspiration to be as kind and peaceful as the Buddha. So it's important to catch anger as quickly as possible. So as soon as the first spark appears in the mind, we want to immediately stamp out that spark. Don't let it turn into a fire. So the sooner you catch it, the easier it is. And catching it quickly requires constant mindfulness. And if you practice in this way, and also doing a lot of metta meditation also is helping to cultivate the opposite habit. That also will make it much easier to stamp out anger when it does start to spark up in the mind. Jim says, if someone close to us is very angry or quick to anger often, is there anything we can do for them? Not really. Not really. This is part of the problem, is that ultimately you can only control your own mind. So of course it's good to want to help other people deal with their anger, but ultimately they have to want to deal with their anger. So if the other person doesn't want to get rid of their anger, there's not really anything we can do to help them. Now, if the person is on good terms with you, if they're a friend of yours or a close relative of yours and you have a good connection with them, then at a time when they're not angry, at a time when they're very calm and happy, then you might find an opportunity to gently talk to them about their anger problem and point out to them how it makes them unhappy. Point out to them how it disrupts their own happiness to be angry. But again, recognize that your odds of success are going to be relatively low, especially if the person is not themselves a spiritual practitioner. So people who are not spiritual practitioners are often extremely resistant to changing their habits. They're often extremely resistant to abandoning unwholesome modes of conduct because they think that's who they are. Often they don't even see it as possible to change those patterns of mind. So you can try, just recognize that your success rate is probably going to be quite low. But you can increase that success rate by, again, looking for the right time and place and pointing out the fact that their behaviors are first and foremost damaging to their own happiness. And then if they're actually receptive and interested, then you can share some practical tools for dealing with anger. But again, the first thing, acknowledge the possibility that you might be completely unsuccessful. Second, look for the ideal time and place to talk to them. And third, emphasize that their behavior first and foremost damages their own happiness. Then you might start to get somewhere. And Sud says, what is the antidote once anger is already there? Is metta the answer, or is it more recommended as a preventive measure rather than treatment? So once anger is already present, the first thing is to cool off the anger. It's very difficult to cultivate metta when the mind is angry. So usually the first thing when the mind is angry is actually cultivating tranquility, mindfulness of the body and tranquility. That usually works to start to settle down the anger a bit. Then when the mind is more calm, then you can cultivate metta. So yes, metta tends to work better as a preventive measure. So if you're habitually cultivating a lot of metta, then you just won't get angry as often, and it also won't be as intense when it happens. But when you notice the anger is already arising, then it's usually better to focus on serenity and on practicing mindfulness of the body. That's usually more effective emergency treatment. And S asks, how can we be sure that forgiveness will make myself feel better instead of getting the pleasure of revenge? Try it. See what happens. Look at the feeling of resentment. Notice how uncomfortable, how painful resentment feels. It's a knife in the heart right now. Every moment that you hold on to resentment is like stabbing yourself in the chest. It's really painful. And when you let go of that hostility, when you let go of that resentment, notice how the mind relaxes and becomes so much more peaceful and happy. It's like, oh, so much nicer to not be stabbing myself with this resentment. So just look for yourself. Look for yourself. What does resentment feel like? And you'll see resentment feels really painful. What does forgiveness feel like? Feels really nice. So that's how you see. Do it and see for yourself. And S says, according to your previous saying, even though we assume there are a lot of crazy dogs in the world, if they bite, would there be some time that we find it valid to kick back? So generally speaking, when attacked by others, the Buddhist response is to get out of the way. The Buddhist response is to avoid your attacker, to try to exit the situation so that you are no longer a target for them. That's the number one best option. So self-defense is a very dangerous option because even if you're thinking, oh, I'm just defending myself, if you are acting with the intention to harm another person, then you are generating bad karma in your own mind, and you are building up harmful intentions in your own mind. So it's very risky to resort to any kind of violence, whether physical or verbal, in self-defense. Because although your intention may be, at the beginning, your intention may just be to defend yourself. Very easily it turns into anger, hatred, hostility, and cruelty. So you want to be very careful. If you go down, if you're in a situation where you really feel like the only escape route is to fight back, you need to really, really carefully watch your mind and really make sure that you don't cause damage unnecessarily. That you don't cause injury unnecessarily, because this is the real risk. When you start fighting back, then you just poison your own mind and make things worse for everyone. It's almost never the right choice. And Sud says, how does one avoid the vipaka of anger the Buddha mentions here if karma of anger is already done? Well, if you've already done the karma, then there's no avoiding the vipaka. Yeah, if you've already done the deed, then you will get the results. The only way to avoid vipaka is to not do the karma in the first place. The only way to avoid the result is to not do the action in the first place. That's the only way. So once you've already done something, then you just have to practice patience and tolerance with the result, because the result will happen. What you can do is try to dilute the harmful consequences by doing a bunch of good karma. That helps. So again, the Buddha gives the simile of the handful of salt. So if you put a handful of salt in a glass of water, then the water tastes very salty. But if you put that same handful of salt in a big lake, well, the lake doesn't taste noticeably salty. The lake still tastes like clear water. So in the same way, the Buddha says that if we do a bunch of bad karma, but only a little bit of good karma, then the consequences of that bad karma will be felt very strongly. But if we do some bad karma, but lots and lots of good karma, then the effects of that bad karma will be much less noticeable. It will be diluted by all the good karma that we do. So if you've already done some anger karma, well, recognize it as such. Recognize, oh, that was not good. I don't want to do that again. I need to be really careful not to do that again. And cultivate lots of good karma. And that will help to dilute the consequences of whatever you've done. Matthias says, can we alleviate someone's bad karma who has bad wishes for us and acting rude by not triggered emotionally and hoping the person well? You cannot do anything for somebody else's karma. The Buddha said, Kamasukomhi. Everyone is the owner of their own karma. Kamandayaido. Everyone receives the consequences of their own karma. Kamayoni. Everyone is born from their own karma. Kamabandhu. Everyone is bound to their own karma. Kamapatisarano. Everyone is constantly returning to their own karma. So this is what the Buddha said. You cannot control another person's karma, but they also can't control yours. Everyone makes their own karma and experiences the consequences of their own karma. So you cannot alleviate someone else's bad karma. Only they can. So not getting triggered and instead wishing the other person well, that's cultivating good karma for yourself. That benefits you. It might also help the other person to deal with their situation, but ultimately it's the other person's decision. And S says, so forgiveness means a kind of letting go and calming down in our own mind only, instead of having to still do something good to our enemies. Correct. Yeah, forgiveness is an internal state of mind. And it usually will also tend to manifest in outward behaviors. But it's ultimately an internal state of mind. So yes. Yeah. And it looks like that's the last question. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and end it this time. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end it this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.